Welcome to Stop Overthinking, the podcast for overthinkers, people pleasers, and perfectionists who want to feel calm and confident enough to handle whatever life sends your way. I'm your host, Kristen Odegaard, a women's life and mindset coach, lifelong educator, and recovering perfectionist. Welcome back to the Stop Overthinking podcast. Today I have a guest with us, Shanenn Bryant. She is the founder and CEO of Top Self, a self-development company offering coaching, courses, and community to those with feelings of low self-worth, insecurity, and jealousy in their relationship. As a relationship confidence expert, the host of the Top Self podcast, Shanenn has inspired thousands to break up with bogus beliefs, crack the control code, and overhaul their insecure habits. I am so excited to have you on the podcast today, Shanenn. Welcome, and please tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got to be a confidence coach and a confidence expert.
Yeah, well, gosh, what a better topic of jealousy and for your podcast of Stop Overthinking, because that's all we do when we're jealous is overthink. So I think this is going to be a great conversation.
Yes. So you have been doing this for a while. What brought you to this particular space?
Yeah, so I grew up, my father was an alcoholic, and I happened to be giving a talk for a women's ACA group. So that's Adult Children of Alcoholics. And I was just talking about my story, what it was like to grow up with a father who was an alcoholic and how it affected me in my adulthood. So some behaviors that I had in my relationships. And one that I was talking about is I suffered from extreme insecurity and jealousy in my relationships. And I gave examples and sort of what that was like. After I was done, all of these hands went up and the women were like, "Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, I can't believe you said some of those things out loud. And it sounded like you were describing my life." That's when I realized, oh, this is what I need to be helping with. I have overcome that. I am very good at managing my insecurities and jealousy, and I wanted to be able to help other people who were experiencing that. And as I started to dig in, I realized there's not a lot of people that are talking about it. There's not a lot of resources for people who are experiencing it, and it's not talked about a lot because it's one of those things where there's shame and embarrassment that's tied to it. So people who are suffering from it aren't talking about it too much.
For sure. And that comparison and jealousy and those sorts of things, I think most people can admit to themselves that they have some level of it for something in their
Right.
life. And sometimes you can laugh about it, but the things that scare us, that hurt us, that cause us the most overthinking and anxiety, like you said, are often the things that we don't talk about. And we think that there's something wrong with us,
Yeah.
that we're not good enough. And we're going to dive into all of those things. So let's start with jealousy. Like what is it from your standpoint?
So thank you for asking that question because we often get it confused with envy or we interchange those words. So we'll say, "Oh, you're so jealous." And what we really mean is you're envious. So I want to really talk about the two differences so that people know what we're going to dive into today. So when we say envy, that's really, if you think about, oh, I'm envious of my neighbor's car or their new house, or I'm envious of the person who got the promotion over me. So that's really like wanting something that someone else has. When it comes to jealousy and what I focus on, that is worried that someone's going to take what you have. And so there's fear in that. There's fear in my partner's going to leave me or abandon me or be taken from me in some way by someone else. And so it's the fear of losing them in that way. And so there are kind of these three underlining factors that contribute to jealousy. So it's the, projection, protection, and competition. And those are the three areas.
Thank you so much for that distinction. And I think it is really important. And I just became more aware recently of that distinction. I think Brene Brown had something in one of her last books about the difference between the two. And it's like, oh, yeah, I may be using this incorrectly.
Yeah.
So that fear that really comes with jealousy. And again, it's not an emotion that many of us like. It's not something that we want to hang on to. And when it appears, sometimes we don't even know what to do with it. So when somebody's feeling jealous, like, let's start with, what does that look like? What does it sound like? We're being general, of course, but
Right.
what are some of those patterns that you see?
Sure. Well, jealousy, we've all felt jealousy or maybe will feel jealousy at some point in our lives. And a little bit here and there is natural. That's okay. That's something that most of us experience. And it even can be a little healthy in some ways. Like, oh, okay, I see that person noticing my partner. And, okay, that all is natural. When it becomes where you're feeling anxious every day, you feel like you can't focus at work, you can't be present with your kids, it is something that's driving your life and it's affecting your partner, that then gets into this toxic relationship that I work with people on. And so I'll just use myself and I'll give some examples to kind of help to really understand what it's like to have this toxic jealousy. So I kind of tease and joke that, should my husband have stayed? I've been with him for 15 years. Should he have stayed? I don't know. Maybe not. But I think he knew that I was working on this jealousy. So thank goodness he did. But in the height of my jealousy, it became where we had to stop going to dinners and movies and events because my jealousy would rear up. And of course, it would ruin wherever we were. And so there'd be times we'd just go to a restaurant and I was already looking for the threats or the perceived threats. So if there were women who I thought that my husband may find attractive or that I thought he would look at, I was scanning the room before we even, put our name in with the hostess. I was already feeling that and feeling jealous and feeling that fear come in and being worried that he might look at them. And so when people say, "Oh my gosh, like, why would you worry about that? Nothing's happened." That's where it gets to, if you haven't experienced it, it might be something hard to understand, but it's really, similar to any other thing that someone has to work on. We all have our things that get us hung up, and this is can certainly be one for women or for couples.
And because you mentioned most people have it, like, is there a normal level? Because you mentioned when it reaches a toxic level. So, like, what is that distinction between the two? How does somebody know, is this a problem?
Yeah, I think when it starts to hit that level, as I mentioned, when you like, if you are feeling anxious every day, if you're looking through your partner's phone, their text messages, their emails, their social media account to see, who they've liked or commented on and who's done the same for them, that's when we know, okay, this is really becoming these insecure behaviors and it's affecting my partner. My husband, it got to a point where he said, "Shannon, I feel like, I've got to walk with my head down. I feel like I can't even look around." And that's when you know, okay, this is really driving my life. I feel anxious every day. I don't feel good. My entire focus is worried about what my partner's doing. Or what they may do. That's when it gets into that toxic level.
You had mentioned the um kind of some signals of jealousy, the projection, protection, and competition. Talk more about each of those
Sure.
and what that means in this process.
So we talk about competition. One thing, of course, social media makes it really hard. We all do some comparison, or most of us are comparing ourselves to other people. But the competition part really comes in when we start to then say, well, that makes me less than. Or we feel like it makes us less than. When we feel or do things that are affecting our relationship. And social media is hard because, I interviewed a guest on my own podcast once, and he mentioned that, gosh, we weren't ever supposed to really know everybody and be able to see everyone, and it's true, and when I grew up, my competition was who I went to school with and who I rode the bus with and who was in my neighborhood, and now we can just see everyone, and so it just makes it a little bit harder and, more comparison come in, so that's one area that people struggle with. Then we go to projection, and this could be 2 different types. One, it could be that someone has experienced a partner who maybe that partner was unfaithful. There was some infidelity there. And now they're in a new relationship, but they're projecting what their previous partner did and they're projecting that into their current relationship. And so that's when your brain really kicks in and it's trying to warn you or protect you. And so that's where the protection comes in. I typically see people fall into 2 buckets. One could be they grew up with some type of dysfunction, so their parent wasn't maybe being the best parent. They maybe felt abandoned in some way as a child, but there was definitely some dysfunction there. Those people could have that and develop this insecurity and this jealousy. Or it could be that they dated someone who had an affair, or maybe they were in a series of relationships where there was infidelity. And so then they're going to go into protection mode. No one likes that. It's not something that feels good. So we're going to protect ourselves so that that doesn't happen again. And unfortunately, it kind of comes out with jealousy. So I always say jealousy is not the problem, it's a solution. It's trying to say, "Hey, I'm showing up as a symptom here. There's something else to go look at."
Thank you. And I think, like you said, that the competition one with social media, and it there's just so much out there, and that's a whole nother conversation
Yeah.
about whether we need boundaries around what we are exposing ourselves to.
Yeah.
And again, so we have the envy of all of this other stuff that's
Mm.
there, but then the jealousy of not feeling good enough. And for women, it's how you look and how you dress, and are you sexy enough, are you doing enough, are you all of the good enough sorts of things that come in. And yeah, holy cow, that can just be overwhelming. So what do you do? So women come to you and they are dealing with some aspect of this in their life that obviously is not serving them, not
Yeah.
helpful. And so what does that look like to start creating some new habits and patterns?
A lot of times, what I will initially see, and not always, but sometimes we're not even sure yet that it's our problem. So you may still be in the phase where you're blaming your partner. So if you hadn't looked at her, I wouldn't have gotten upset. If you um, reassured me more, I wouldn't feel jealous. And so what I really want to say is, if you are experiencing this toxic jealousy, it really is on you. That is something that's kind of a me problem. Now, could you have a partner that is going overboard and doing those types of things? Yes, you could. But I think more often than not, it's okay, maybe even they did look. What are you making that mean about you? Because we can't ever predict if our partner's gonna stay or not. If we're gonna be together for the next 5 or 10 years or for a lifetime, we also can't predict whether our partner is gonna be faithful. So we really have to turn it on ourselves and focus, like, why is this driving my life so much? Why is this such a big thing in my life? And so I start with self awareness and getting really aware of what you're doing in that relationship and your insecure behaviors. And so I start with, I say, you can't move what's in your way until you acknowledge the insecure things you think, do, and say. And so, if it's okay, I want to go through those 3 things
Yes, please.
because it's a great place for people to start. So let's talk about the think. That's a big one. And you mentioned competition and the am I enough? And that's big. What we don't realize is how often we are talking negatively to ourselves on a daily basis. And unfortunately, most of the things I think today, I'm going to think tomorrow. And so if I'm thinking negatively today about myself, I'm going to think that way tomorrow too. And I'm listening, my brain is hearing those things. So, what am I thinking? Do I think that I'm not good enough? Do I think my partner doesn't love me? Do I have negative thoughts about my body? All of, the things that you mentioned, and really tracking those things. What am I saying to myself? Because yes, we might have a general idea here and there, but if when you start tracking them and you see all of the different thoughts you have and how often on a daily basis you're thinking those things, it really is enlightening to see that. So that's the think. Then there's say. What are insecure things you're saying to your partner that is driving a wedge that's signaling to them that you don't trust them? And so I'll use myself as an example of maybe one of my go-tos when I was at the height of my jealousy was, my husband might have been trying to remind me of something that happened in the past. He said, "Remember when you and I went to whatever place?" If I didn't remember right away, I'd say something like, "Oh, that must have been your girlfriend," or "That must have been your other girlfriend." So, just those little jabs that if you just say them doesn't sound too terrible, but it definitely signals to our partner, "I don't trust you, and we aren't on solid footing here." So, those are the say things. What are you saying to your partner? And then the last one, and it's really where I like to start, is the do. So, the do is, are you looking through their phone, their social media, their email, their text messages? Again, mine was looking them up on location services. So, what are the insecure habits that you've gotten into? Because the unfortunate part is when you do those things, that in itself causes anxiety. So if I'm getting ready to look in their phone, I'm feeling and experiencing anxiety because of that. So those are the do's. We want to track them and write them down. What are all the things? And then what I say is let's pick one that you think is the easiest to stop doing. You can do all the other 27 things that you're already, that you can still do those, but that one that's easiest that you think is maybe the easiest to put down to stop doing, let's start there. And so mine was location services and I stopped. And then you go, okay, literally, it's been a few hours and I haven't done it. It's been a few days I haven't done it. It's been a few weeks. And so because we need those small wins in the beginning of,
Mhm.
okay, this is getting a little bit better. There's certainly other things behind that and that I talk through, in my coaching program in terms of your attachment style that plays a role. And then those things that you're saying, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, all of that.
Thank you for sharing
Sure.
that because I think it's important, like you said, and I'm always talking about awareness. Like everything starts with awareness because how do you change it if you don't know if it's there? So
Yeah.
think, do, and say, and taking a look at what that really means and what you're bringing to the situation. So
Yeah.
I like just that ownership piece too, and it's hard when you're blaming. I mean, I came out of a marriage that had infidelity on
Mm,
my spouse's part, and I don't wish that on anybody, and I know that there's many of my listeners who haven't been there, and I'd be so grateful for that. When you are in that cycle, it's just a really tough place to be and takes a lot of work to get out of that. I want to circle around because you talked about trust. So I'm putting you on the spot
yeah.
in the sense of just your own personal feeling when you're talking about trust. And there's kind of that back and forth about, do you have to earn trust or is it
Mm,
given until it's not there anymore? When people are coming to you and they've been really insecure,
yeah.
what does that conversation about trust look like?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the situation for sure. Mostly, I work with people where there's no sign of infidelity, nothing has even happened. And I'll come back to that. So, in your case, where there has been infidelity, then yes, that probably looks a little bit different. And there's certainly some, okay, we've got a baby step back into this of how we can the partner can earn that trust back, but also it's really like a lot about then learning to trust yourself, and that's for both roles, right? I've got to learn too that if I start to see similar patterns, what am I going to do with that? Or I need to trust myself that this is now a boundary that maybe wasn't there before. What am I going to do if that boundary is crossed? So there's some things where like I have to trust myself and not be in scarcity mode
Mhm.
that I don't, if I don't if I say something that this person's going to leave me or that it's going to end the relationship. So in that sense, we have to trust ourselves and not come from scarcity. I typically work with people where there's no sign of infidelity in their current relationship. Again, maybe it has been in the past and they're projecting into this relationship. So when it comes to trust, it's one of those where the best way to trust someone is to trust them. And so we have to give them, okay, let me give you just a little piece and let's see. Okay, I have to give them the opportunity to prove to me they're not my ex or they're not my father who wasn't there or who abandoned me. And so we have to step into that. And the best way to trust is to trust. That's harder said than done, right? And that part comes with the trusting myself. And so really getting clear on, because I think especially women, because we hear this so much of women's intuition, and it's great, but do I know the difference between intuition and fear? Because a lot of times we're really coming from fear and we're mistaking it for intuition. And so there are ways that you can tell those two things apart.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about what the difference is between those?
Yeah, I think even if you just say the words, right? Fear and intuition, they even sound very different.
Mhm.
One sounds really heavy, and it is, and that's fear. And then the other one sounds light and airy, and it's also the way they come to you. So if I am already fearful that my husband going out of town and that he's going to be on a work trip, and I'm already fearful of who's going to be around, and I'm already fearful when he goes to dinner, and I'm already fearful of how long he's going to stay, and I'm looking him up and I'm in that mode. And then let's say I call and he doesn't answer and I go, "Oh, see, I knew it. I had a feeling that he wasn't going to answer his phone, or I had a feeling that something was going to go on." Most likely, that's actually fear. You're already in it, your brain is already primed. And so, of course, them not answering the phone is going to seem like a much bigger deal to you because you're already in the fear. Intuition, it's lighter. It's going to come to me when I'm in the shower or just when I'm driving to work. I'm not thinking about it. And then I go, wait a second. That's like the third time that he's been out of town and not answered his phone when I've called. Wait a second. So it may be more like that. So
Mhm.
they're very different and they feel very different. And I want to make sure that we're not going off of, well, I had a feeling, or, because I could promise, I would say to myself, I'll bet you that our waitress is going to be attractive. Like, I'm trying to go tonight and I'm going to try not to be jealous, but I bet you our waitress is going to be attractive. And always she was, right? That's when we sit next to the bachelorette party. So it just like, of course, because we're already on that track.
Well, I know when I was listening to some of your podcasts in preparation for this
Uh-huh.
episode too, and there was one you were talking about meltdown metrics
Yeah.
from a couple of months ago. What really hit me about that episode is you were talking about, when you're already in a cycle that you're perpetuating yourself. So, like if you're sad and you're listening to sad music, or it's from a breakup, or just having a sad day or something. And so, it's interesting just with this conversation, I think for people to be able to recognize, like you said, if you're thinking it today, you're probably going to think it tomorrow. And there are these pieces of us that it may not seem like jealousy, but it might be stuff, baggage that we're bringing into the relationship that is showing up, right? It's those
Hmm.
signals of those kind of things. I mean, I can think, I didn't realize until after my marriage ended and all these other things, and I started doing these work, but like I recognized I had been let down a lot in my growing up years for various different things. And so the protection that I
Yeah.
did around myself, right? So that I wasn't
Hmm.
going to be let down again, or pushing people away. And we get into attachment styles with that. But
Yeah.
that I was carrying that with me, and I had no idea what that was really doing, and that insecurity that it was
Hmm.
bringing into the relationship. Because to me, I was like, well, this is just a fact.
Right.
This is the way I am. Here is all of the reasons that people have let me down. And so then it would be like dropping my expectations of other people, but then being resentful because
Yeah.
you're not holding up your end of the bargain either.
Mhm.
And so I just want to bring that up for listeners. If you're thinking the jealousy maybe isn't resonating with you right now, there might be other pieces of that competition, the protection, the
Yeah.
projection that is still there somewhere that maybe isn't helpful in your relationship. So just insecurity as a whole, and we know from women there's lots of things that feed into that. We start with awareness, but how do we build ourselves up
Mm. Yeah, so
to
good, yeah.
to be more confident, to feel more of that worth, and to really be able to give ourselves a real chance in a relationship.
Yeah, well, you just gave a really good example of saying, I realized that growing up, I was let down a lot. And that's typically what will happen is where we had the biggest void in our childhood is what we are hyper vigilant about in our adulthood in terms of, but then we come up with all of these strategies to protect ourselves. And it doesn't mean that they're the best strategies or in our benefit. It just means it usually it's I need to get this need met. So you have this need of not being let down. How do I do that? What's the quickest, fastest way to get that need met? And that's what you're going to do, whether that's healthy or unhealthy, whether it makes sense, it doesn't make sense. And so your fastest way, what you probably learned was the fastest, best way is I'm going to put this wall up and I'm going to lower my expectations so that nobody lets me down. But in a sense, that's then all there was. So now you've got this resentment and all these things coming up. It's the absolute same thing across the board, whatever you're dealing with. And so when we're thinking that way, we have to go, wait a second. This core belief that I have of I'm always let down, you have to go, is that true? Like, yes, it happened in my childhood, right?
Mhm.
Was it always? And yes, that might have been what happened there, but is that true today? Am I always let down today? What we hardly ever go back and do is inventory those negative core beliefs that we have about ourselves or about a situation. And so, like you said, then you just go on with life going, that's fact, because it feels that way. It feels very factual. And so we have to go back and say, for that example, like, what are times when I wasn't let down? In all areas of my life. When was I not let down at work? When was I not let down in my relationship? When was I not let down financially? So, kind of just going through those on a regular basis and going, okay, I can see that that might have happened a lot in my childhood. And why it's sticking out so much is because there was a lot of emotion behind that, right? There was a lot that really tagged my brain to go, this really hurt when this happened. So, that's going to tag my brain so then it becomes much more prominent than maybe some of the smaller things that actually have happened, right, in your adulthood. So it's really going back and trying to do some of that reprogramming to say, well, wait a second. Maybe I'm not always let down. Here's a time when I wasn't. Here's a time when I could trust in someone. Here's a time that I could depend on somebody. Here's a time and really working that way. But then also yourself. And maybe you've done some of that work like, when is the time when I didn't let myself down? When I was strong enough to handle a situation? And so that's really where that deep work comes from. That's, it takes a while to reprogram that. But as you said, awareness is huge. And so I'm sure once you got aware that, oh, that's the thing, now you can do some work on it.
You can do some work, and man, that's hard work too. Like
So hard.
all this inner work, and to be in a place, I mean, I think to want to be able to change it, but emotionally it can be draining. And when you're moving on with the rest of your life and working and maybe raising kids or
Yeah.
paying bills and all the other adulting that you have to
Yeah.
do, and make time to heal these childhood wounds and other things that you're bringing to it. So
Yeah,
um
you brought up Brene Brown earlier, and she has this great quote, I think that she says is everybody wants transformation, but no one wants to change. It's that work that you've got
right.
to put into it. And sometimes you're not always at a place, as you said, to really look at it. It took me many years to go back and start to have a relationship with my dad. I had to be ready. People were pushing me. My mom would push me a lot. I really think you should have a relationship with your dad. You're going to regret it. I had to be ready. And sometimes you just have to be ready in your state of life to go, okay, now I can look at it. I'm strong enough. I feel good enough to look at it.
Well, and like you said too, I think that's where coaching can be so helpful in the sense that jealousy and fear and insecurity and all of the stuff that's wrapped up in this topic that we've been
Yeah.
talking about, right? It's heavy. You might have some awareness of it, but you also sometimes need somebody to gently, or maybe not so gently, show you, really, is this the thought that you want to hang on to? Is this always true? Some of those kind of things, because we get so used to hearing our voice repeating
Mhm.
in our head, it can be really hard to see some of this on our own. And then you do, and then it's like, oh, yuck, this is what I've got inside me. Let me push it down a little bit more because I don't want to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what I love about coaching as a whole, is that it can really be that person to, guide you and give you tools for sure, but also, there's some junk that's going to come up,
Mhm.
and to be able to really hold your hand through the process as you're working through, because when we're doing it on our own, sometimes we just want to give up
Yeah.
when we don't see the transformation we want as fast enough, or that it's hard.
Yeah,
Some of those
and
kind of
don't
things.
recognize the things we are saying, right? It's very easy. It's easier for someone to sit across from that person and be able to pick up on the things that they're saying and convincing themselves of. So, it just makes it a little bit easier if you've got someone else that's really paying attention to that and is able to call that out.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about, when you're really wanting your partner to change, and, having to do some of that work yourself. I know for women sometimes that can be like, dang it, I'm doing everything. And why do I have to be the one to do this? How do you respond to clients when they just really want the other person to be doing some work?
Yeah. Well, I think this is very interesting, and I've seen it work myself, and I'm fortunate enough that my husband doesn't listen to my podcast or other ones, so I'm able to say the secret. But if I want him to be romantic, the best way is for me to be romantic and for him to pick up on those cues. But also, this is maybe a weird comparison, but I have a 7-year-old German Shepherd who he's my work buddy. He lays here and sleeps half the day. But he is just loyal to a fault no matter what. It doesn't matter if I took him for a walk that day or I didn't take him for a walk, or I would never not feed or water him, but if I didn't, he's still going to be loyal and protect me, and I think that's sort of the way it's just because that's him, and that is who he is, and that's what kinda dog he is, and I think to look at it almost from that perspective of, well, what type of person do I want to be? It doesn't matter how my partner is going to respond or not respond, but how do I wanna be just because that is who I am and who I want to be. And so sometimes, yes, can it get hard when we go, oh, why am I doing all the work? So, one, we have to model it for someone to see it. And that a lot of times will help. But two, just knowing like this is for me and for my benefit. Here's the really great thing is when you start to do that work on yourself and you start to trust in yourself and you start to get really secure with yourself, if there are things with your partner that maybe now are not aligning, that's going to show itself very clearly. Whereas before, you might question because you're still questioning yourself all the time. Like, is this the right partner for me or not? Is this person going to come alongside me and us grow together, or are they not? And when you do that work yourself and when you're in it for you, that's going to become very evident if there are things like that and issues like that.
Mhm. Yes, I agree. And again, it's taking some work. It's doing some really deep deep thinking, deep questioning constantly to be able to kind of go and change. But I love that too. And I talk a lot about values and priorities with my clients, right? The woman, who is it that you want to be? How do you want to show up? How do you want to feel? And part of that is learning to create some of those things for yourself, but you also have to know what it is that you want, and just have some clarity around that topic rather than just, I want the world and other people to do the things that are somehow in my brain and they're supposed to read
Right.
and just show up to make me feel differently. So again, it's wanting this thing that is just not attainable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, and I think with the jealousy too, when we start working on it, of course, I'm going to notice the changes within myself, or a client's going to notice those changes very quickly. Their partner may not notice them yet because you're feeling it internally and they're maybe not on board yet. And so I think that's, the time too where we have to give the grace back to our partner who's been dealing with this and who's been there with us as we were jealous. Now that I'm starting to work on it and I'm starting to make improvements, it may be a while before they actually see it, before they can see the differences in you. And so giving them grace to know that you're going to see it much quicker than other people. It's like the same thing with losing weight, right? I'm going to notice it first because my clothes fit different. Nobody's really going to notice for a while. It takes a bit for that to catch up. It's the same with
Mhm.
jealousy.
Yeah. And what are some of the feelings and things that women notice as they're improving?
So, one of the things I think is, okay, I'm not spending the focus and the anxiety. So, I'm not feeling as anxious every single day. I'm not feeling this strong urge of anxiety because I'm not doing these habitual things anymore. So, that's a big one. And then, really just being able to, okay, I feel like I can focus at work now. I can focus on my own things. And this is when we're 97% of the time focused on our partner, we're not doing the things that we want to do in our lives. We're not accomplishing the things that we have set. And I see a lot of times where we will abandon those things because all of our focus and energy is with our partner and what our partner's doing. So then you see that swing come back like, okay, wait a second. I've always wanted to do this. Or just as simply as like, I can focus now when I'm at work, or I feel present now when I'm with my kids and I can actually sit down and read them a book and have conversations with them and feel like I'm here with them and my mind isn't elsewhere.
Yeah, being able to be in the moment and just not
Mhm.
constantly spinning. You know, eh, people are going to have their own internal experiences, right? But jealousy and fear and anxiety and all of it, and none of it feels good. And so to be able to get to a place and honor yourself, like, I need to do this work to be able to get to being present in the moment, feeling calmer, not in panic, or just the scarcity that what I
Mm.
have is going to disappear. Those are hard places to be, and so we're here to tell you today that you don't have to stay there.
That's
Very
right,
good.
that's right.
So Shannon, thank you for this conversation, and you have a podcast of your own. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. The podcast is called Top Self, and it really does focus on helping women who are insecure and jealous in their relationships. And I mean, there are other things that we talk about because it's not just, the amazing thing, and I know that you know this about coaching is once you start to work on this stuff and you're really getting to those core negative beliefs and you're starting to turn some of that around, it not only is going to help you in the area of jealousy, but your relationships overall at work, again, with your kids or your family. So it really spills out in all areas of your life. And so we talk in depth. I bring guests on, I do solo episodes to really help women understand one, that they're not alone, that there are many, many people that are suffering from this. And two, okay, now how do we move forward and what are things that we can do to start to tame this and start to manage it?
Thank you for sharing. And I will link the podcast in the show notes as well. And other than your podcast, where can people find you or learn more about you and what you offer?
Yeah. They can go to topself.com. And also, if anyone's interested, there is a quiz right there on the homepage that you can take, the attachment style quiz, to find out your attachment style. And that gives a lot of really good information. It's a great starting point to see where you are and, some of those specific personality needs that you may have.
Yes. Okay. So topself.com. And again, I will link that in the show notes. So thank you so much for talking about this today. As we said, it's not a glamorous or sexy topic. It's one of those kind of taboo ones and often gets just pushed away where shame will just fester even more if
Yeah.
this is something that somebody's dealing with at any level. So, thank you for bringing light to the topic. And so, any closing thoughts?
No, but thank you so much. I do appreciate you giving the platform for people to be able to hear this because I did, as you said, there's not a lot of resources, not a lot of people they can go to. And so thank you for giving them a platform to at least hear a little bit about it and know that they're not the only one.
No, they're not the only one. So, thank you, Shannon. And to the listeners, I will talk to you next week. Thank you for listening to the Stop Overthinking podcast with Kristen Odegaard. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone else who would benefit from the message. To learn more about working with me and links to social media and free resources, head over to my website, coachwithkristen.com. That's Kristen spelled Kristen. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. Have a great week.